All right, all right, all right. It's finally happening, people. We are kicking off a brand new section here on the channel and a new podcast. Pistis Orientalia podcast is about to infect the whole world. At least we're ambitious. And in order to do that, we have, a guest just can measure up to that. And that's why we are here. So I'm going to ask to my co-host, Joshua, how are you doing today? Great to have you here.
Hi, you hear me, right?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Perfect. I'm great. I'm so happy to be here again with you, enjoying this topic that actually is very related to my area. And I'm really happy to be today here with a new scholar to talk about these interesting things that, for some strange reason, that you find them around all the Bible and ancient Near East, but the people don't know it. So I'm really
Yeah,
happy
yeah.
that we're gonna touch it today. So happy to be back. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. No, thank you for collaborating and for supporting us. This really appreciated. So, you know, it's been in the making. I've been, posting about it, making sure that we provide the aesthetics, everything. And thank God that we are here. And I just want to publicly go and say, we together, thank you, Dr. Joanna Töyräänvuori, for being here, for kindly accepting our invitation. It's an honor. Dr. Töyräänvuori, the floor is yours. How are you doing today?
Glad to be here and honored to apparently be the first guest of this new podcast. So
Yeah.
nice to meet both of you.
Great, great, great. So, without much further ado, let's get into things. But before doing that, Dr. Töyräänvuori, we need you to give us a bit of your background, who you are, your credentials, So, for people who may not be aware who you are, where you teach, so we can give it that context of yours. So, please help us with that.
So I'm a docent of ancient Near Eastern studies at the University of Helsinki, which is in the German tradition like equivalent to associate professor. And I'm also a docent of cultural history at the University of Turku. And I currently work as a research fellow at the Finnish Institute in the Middle East. We're stationed at Beirut, but we're evacuated at the beginning of March. So I'm currently in Helsinki.
Thank you, thank you. So, yeah, go ahead. You're about to say something else.
Yes, I wrote my dissertation on this topic that we're talking about today. So I wrote it in the University of Tübingen in Germany under the auspices of Professor Herbert Neer.
Yeah, top notch people right there. Okay, so I was just telling her off camera because she's familiar. Simo Parpola, who is a famous, really high premier assyriologist. If you got your nose in this field, that's a big name, and she's related, and also he has played a really important role in her doctoral preparation along with the other academics. I hope Dr. Töyräänvuori, we can have him on the podcast before it's too late. It would be that would be great. But yeah. Oh, by the way, Marduk Spear is sending greetings here to you, Dr. Töyräänvuori, and also he seems to be aware and to be familiar with Simo Parpola's scholarship, which is great. All right. So Joshua, let's go and get into things here. I want to give you the honor to go with the first question. Let me know if you can see it right there, and then we'll take it from there.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Mar. So, Doctor, by the way, Doctor, do you prefer me to call you Doctor, Madam, or just Joanna, as you prefer?
Call me Joanna.
Joanna. Okay, so this I like this closer. Normally, scholars are closer people. I like that. So we feel like we the teacher. Thus, I think better. So I have this question for you, Joanna. Is there had been many studies around the sea and the conflict myth. In what ways does your work differentiate from the others, and what is contribution to a big conversation? And I would like to add in quickly to this question, if this particular work of yours related to this chaos kind of concept. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so I discussed the combat myth or the myth of divine combat. I prefer to use this term on the Levantine area. rather than this conflict myth, which is a commonly used term, since it seems to me like conflict and the resolution of a conflict part of like most myths or even most stories. Like most stories have a conflict that is then resolved. And to me, that makes it a kind of a useless tool for differentiation. Of course, like there might be some stories that don't have any conflict, but they tend not to be a very like interesting story. So you need the conflict in stories. And I think it would be good to start by defining like what I am talking about. So my book, which you can apparently see there, was about the myth of combat between the storm god and the sea, or this personified sea, as found in different versions or iterations on the Levantine coast, and of which there may or may not be traces or remembrances in the Hebrew Bible, chiefly in the prophetic or poetic texts. And there were a few other books that came out around the same time as mine. So there was Deborah Scoggins-Ballantyne and Noga Darshan, who had very similar books that came out that I wasn't able to engage with in my book. So I was like arguing with older traditions, or like older literature at the time. So we like our books came out around the same time. And so my take on this, like a very old theory, like it's I can talk about Hermann Gunkel a bit later on, who came up with this idea of the chaos come.
By all means, yeah.
My take on it was to like try to locate this myth and its uses in the realm of the political, but not as somehow like reflecting historical realities in the area of the late Bronze Age, which is how the myth from Ugarit has been viewed in recent times, but more as like how the myth reproduces the legitimation of kingship and the system of government in these kingdoms that use the myth. So I was looking at like how the myths had been used in the real world to sort of like justify having a king, to justify the dynastic succession by like reactivating this myth and suggesting that like every king represented the deity that had won this combat. Like the deity had been the primordial king or the archetypal king, and then the real world king was sort of like representing the king of the gods on the earthly plane. And by defeating the adversary at the dawn of time, so they had justified monarchic rule for the king in the real world. And I was interested in how the myth was used to justify the mechanism of monarchic succession. And I think that was like what was different from previous interpretations.
Mm-hmm. And of course, when we talk about you talk about Ugaritic, which is part of this whole big conversation. Can you tell us just a bit more how that does play in your work? Because we got Bel, the storm god. We got it's just connected with all these traditions. So how would you respond to that, Dr. Töyräänvuori?
Yeah, so it would be good to start with the Ugaritic myth, which was really central to my thesis. I'm not sure. People might be familiar with Ugarit nowadays. I saw in your intro that it was.
Yeah.
So just to tell people who might not know, Ugarit was this kingdom on the coast of modern Syria in the late Bronze Age. So it's a little north of modern Latakia. And for reasons that are debated, pretty much the city ceased to exist at the end of the late Bronze Age, around 1150 BCE, during the collapse of this whole Bronze Age system of interconnected kingdoms. And there were texts that were discovered there, written in various languages, one of which was the Ugaritic language that seems to have been native to the city. And this language is related to Biblical Hebrew and Aramaic, and also Arabic and Phoenician, all the Semitic languages. And there were archives of texts that were discovered in the city. And the most interesting texts for biblical scholars was the so-called Baal cycle, which is not actually one text or one myth, but a collection of myths that have to do with the storm god Baal that you can see there. famous stele from Ogrid. And these texts are like connected with the character of Baal. So the storm god Baal is the central character, but their myths are not necessarily connected to each other. And Baal might also be familiar to some people from the Hebrew Bible, because his name is actually mentioned there. And in the Hebrew Bible, he seems to be like this antagonistic figure. He's sort of a villain, even in some like prophetic stories, but he's definitely a negative character there. Whereas in the Yudic texts, he was a protagonist. He was like the good guy. In this myth, where the storm god combats the sea, he is essentially the hero, which was surprising because it had such a bad reputation in the Hebrew Bible. And now it's not entirely clear what happens in this myth that we call the Baal cycle, because it's a collection of texts that may or may not have been connected. And we're not even really sure where the story starts, because the order of columns in what's considered the first tablet is unclear. So the beginning of the myth is like very murky. But traditionally, we see it as like Baal, the storm god, fighting with a god who is called Yam, the sea, who is possibly a representative of the Mediterranean Sea. And the storm god wins this combat, this battle, with some help. He builds himself a palace, and then he has a very interesting episode with Mot, who is the personified death. He dies, he's buried, and then the goddess Anat, whose relationship with Baal is not very clear, helps revive him. And this is a very simplified version of what happens in the text. So it's very complicated to interpret the text and see how they connect to like each other. But well, when I'm talking about the combat myth, I'm just talking about the first part of this myth. So with the storm god's battle with the sea. And you'll notice that Baal has another major battle with death, which is also a combat myth. Like they fight in the myth, and he loses. And it's definitely a myth of combat, but it's the battle between the storm god and the sea that I have argued is something that was relevant to kingship, particularly to these people who kept like rewriting this myth.
Thank you, Dr. Töyräänvuori. Let's go here with the second question. Joshua, you're going to help me with that as well. Let me know if you can see it on your screen. Should appear by now there. Oh, there you go.
Perfect. It says this. You spell out session 2.1, Northwest Semític Combat Myth, in 3 subgroups, namely the seasonal myth, the cosmogonic myth, and the political myth. Please elaborate on defining each one of them, please, Doctor. Go ahead, Joanna.
Okay, so these are the like traditional interpretations for the Ugaritic Baal cycle, or the combat myth, that has naturally been compared with other myths from the ancient Near East ever since it was discovered. So the texts were discovered like in the early 1930s, so almost 100 years ago now. So simply put, the like seasonal myth or the seasonal pattern is usually like connected to nature and the coming of the season, the like changing of the seasons. So this was the seasonal interpretation of the myth. The cosmogonic, however you pronounce it, interpretation.
Cosmogonic, I think.
Cosmogonic. Saw it as like combat preceding creation, akin to what some people have read to the Hebrew Bible, like the book of Job, where God battles with the monster Leviathan, and they see this as somehow like having preceded creation. So, and also like in Mesopotamia, you have the myth of Enuma Elish, where also like preceding creation. So it precedes the creation of the world. And then this political interpretation, which is different from what I was talking about, which has been done a lot in recent years, is to read this myth as an analogy of like the real world political situation at the end of the late Bronze Age. So in this interpretation, the battle is seen as like reflecting either the position of the city or the kingdom of Ugarit between the great empires of the era, which were the Hittite Empire and the Egyptian Empire. So somehow seen as reflecting this, or alternatively seeing as like reflecting the position of Ugarit or the Ugaritic king within the vassals of the Hittite Empire. So to see like the Hittite king as like representing a character in the myth, and to see like the Baal as a reflection of the Ugaritic king and his like weak position during this time. So like seeing these like real world analogies or reflections inside the myth, and especially like this political interpretation I've had problems with, given that the myth seems to be much older than this historical situation. So we have like,
Okay.
for example, in the iconography that's been found in Syria, in the same area, from the Middle Bronze Age, like the same myth seems to have already existed in the Middle Bronze Age in this area. So, like, of course, like we can see reflections in the myth, but it seems to be like so much older than the area that I don't think it's like a straight up retelling of like the historical situation. And of course, like the stories that we tell, they do always depict our own world, and in some say they have been written at a certain time. So it's possible that the text that we have now was written in the late Bronze Age, and it does reflect the situation somewhat. So, for example, like to use a modern analogy, there's this Christopher Nolan film called Odysseus that's about to come out.
Yeah.
Like it definitely depicts our own world, our own time. So like we can see sentiments from our own time in the text, even as it attempts to portray the Bronze Age. So it is at the same time like retelling an ancient myth, and it's also telling us something about our own time. So it's possible also that the Baal cycle at Ugarit was somehow reflecting the time of writing, even though it is a much older myth in the area.
Thank you. Quick question, Dr.
Can I-
Töyräänvuori. Yeah, just let me make this comment just very quick. The Hittite, they had their version of this combat myth. Can we safely go as far as to say that, right? They had, they're part of this ancient world, and they also fall in this category. They have I assume they have their own version of this combat myth. And also, my question to you is that also applies to the political side, as you are explaining. The king is in some ways representing the deity, and it's like I don't know, this is a word you use in the work, but like a legitimization or legitimacy of the political power from the deity.
Yes, definitely. In the like Hittite text, there are many different myths where the gods are in combat, or they combat a monster of some kind, like Ulikumi or Iluyanka. So there are different myths. And also like they have been compared with the Greek myth. So even in like the Greek, like there's a battle between the gods, the generations of the gods, the gods against the Titans. So that this myth of combat like is found in different areas, and it is possible that the Hittites had like borrowed the myth from the Syrian area. They do seem to appreciate the storm god of Aleppo, especially. So, like, because Aleppo was on the central side, it could be like they had somehow borrowed it. But like stories of like gods in combat are very common in different areas. So it's not everything is related necessarily.
Thank you, Ayosha. You were about to say something.
Yes, I don't know if this is part of the future question, but I just want to address quickly how Joanna understand going specifically to the Hebrew Bible, the archetype of obviously Yahweh is described as a storm god in the Hebrew Bible. So there is a interesting scholar recently was speaking with Marv. It's called Nissim Anzalat. Maybe you know who is Nissim Anzalat. He is the writer of the most recent work about Psalm 29. there's actually called it a Baalic psalm. So I would like you to know your opinion about it, as is this psalm somehow describing a probably original Baal hymn, or is actually a Yahweh, but describe it as a Baalic god, storm god, and obviously your counsel on the chaos, because I know it's mentioned there. Please, thank you.
So I'm not sure if you're familiar with Professor Reinhard Müller from Göttingen, who wrote this book on Yahweh as the weather god. He's like the original person who started looking for Yahweh as the storm god. And he and I wrote an article recently where we looked at Psalm 29 specifically. So we did like a new translation, or well, he did most of it, but we worked together on this. So we did a translation of the psalm and then of the relevant Ugaritic text, and then also compared this to the iconography I mentioned from the area of Syria from the Middle Bronze Age, where we have depictions of the storm god and this combat in these like seal impressions. And definitely there seems to be like Psalm 29 has been called the Canaanite psalm because it was like traditionally seen as containing very old materials. So the dating of the text of the Hebrew Bible is a very complicated question, and I don't want to like get into that, but it is seen as like one of the older pieces of poetry in the Hebrew Bible, and definitely it contains at least like remembrances or some reflections of older texts. So whenever that psalm was written, it does seem to contain older material because it is containing some lines that are very reminiscent to Ugaritic poetry. That like we compare some lines. So there's nothing like exactly that is borrowed from older text, but it contains a similar language. So it seems to portray Yahweh as the kind of like a storm god similar to Baal. And there are other psalms also like that have similar themes. So there is, like I mentioned in Book of Job, Leviathan. So that is also found in Psalm 72 maybe. But there are like short snippets in some of the psalm that seem to contain similar language to the Ugaritic text.
Actually, Dr. Töyräänvuori, correct me if I'm wrong, but you, as you said, you co-wrote this article with Professor Müller in this book that is co-edited by Marty Nissinen, which is called Sacred Tradition, I think it is. And I'm not sure if that's the book where I found that article of yours. Perhaps I need to double check. But as Marduk Spears is saying here, let me just find his comment. Oh, there you go. It says Reinhard Müller could be a great guest for the future. Oh yeah.
Yes,
oh yeah.
Yes, please
definitely.
But yes, it was in this book edited by Martin Nissinen, because Reinhard Müller and I were both members of Martin's Center of Excellence. So even though we're in different teams, we did discuss this like over the years.
Thank you. All right, let's move on here with the third question. Let me know if I can put it right here on your screen. So we continue there. Should be here. Let me know if you can see it. Okay, it should appear right there. Joshua, go ahead. Hit with the third question.
Perfect. Well, as it related to my first question, this is interesting. Say you opted not to use the term Kaskampf, working out a new definition of Northwest Semitic myth of divine combat. What reasons lie behind this decision with this section of your work? Thank you.
Yeah, so we sort of broached that before, but so just to like lay the background, Chaoskampf is the myth that the German scholar Hermann Gunkel gave to this mythic pattern that he had detected primarily in Mesopotamian sources, and he wrote his book in the late 19th century. And he proposed that well, he was looking mostly at Mesopotamian myths, so Enuma Elish and like other, like not all of the texts have even been discovered when he came up with this theory. But he proposed that this mythic pattern could also be found in the Bible, sort of like bookending the Hebrew Bible and the Christian New Testament. And this theory was quite ingenious for its time. But I like, even though we can, I think, see this pattern in the Bible, it's not like something that can be found in the Uritic Baal myths. So Gunkel proposed that this combat is about the triumph of order from chaos, and this makes sense in the biblical context, because there's this like battle in the beginning that precedes creation. If we see like God battling Leviathan or the monsters like before creation, and then it lays the foundation for this new creation. So this like new creation happens at the end of the Christian New Testament, where there's a New Jerusalem and like there's this battle, the apocalypse, and so there's in the beginning and in the end there's a combat, and then there's creation order that follows like this combat. And it seems like this creation of order is both like the result and the intended purpose of this combat in the Bible. But it's like not what happens in the Uritic text. So there's this underlying assumption here that chaos is evil and order is good, even though like we could make an argument that order can also symbolize stagnation, and chaos can symbolize like germinating life. And given that these texts were discovered, and even the first translations of the Uritic myths were made like before the Second World War, we should at least be conscious of what kind of biases have in interpretation of the myth as somehow like symbolizing this victory of order out of chaos. And I personally find the dialectic of order and chaos a poor match for what we actually find in the Ugaritic text, because I'm not seeing how this raging thunderstorm somehow depicts order, because Baal is portrayed almost as this trickster figure in the text. So he's I don't see how he represents order, and then represents chaos. They're very similar. So both of them want to be king. Both of them want to build a palace for themselves. Their desires are the same, and the only real difference between them is that Baal wins the battle, and Baal has friends, whereas the sea only has underlings. So it's this is I think that the excuse they have for why this should be interpreted as a chaos kampf is that the building of a palace is somehow seen as symbolizing the creation of the world. But I mentioned, the sea also wants to build a palace for himself. So even if the sea had won the combat, then you'd also have creation. So it's not very similar to what we find in the Bible. And I don't know. I guess that an argument could be made for the sea representing order, in the ruler in the tradition of having despotic rulers. So despotic rulers they do represent order out of chaos. But I don't know. I think Gunkel's theory of chaos kampf is very interesting, and I think it adds to something of how we view the Bible, but it's not very good explanation for the Ugaritic texts and what we actually find in the text, because like I said, they're very similar.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Dr. Töyräänvuori, before going through this Psalm 74 and Psalm 89, because I want to know what your thoughts and take on that related to this topic are. I just want to say this. We had Professor John Day on the podcast, on the other podcast, which is Verano 711, and we were talking about that specifically because he wrote his dissertation in 1985 on this topic, maybe from a different view. But he was talking about Gunkel. I mean, this book took what, over 100 years to be translated into Spanish, into English. It took a long time ago. But what I was going to say, just to along lines the lines that you were saying something very interesting on part of Gunkel. I mean, he saw connections in Genesis and took it all the way to the book of Revelation. And in there, you see this dragon, seven-headed dragon, you see that the chaos motif here and there. I mean, I don't know what you think about that, but I think it's right there. It's so evident in the text that I'm pretty sure this myth took on different, nuances, images, color, whatever, but the core is just lying under right there. So I mean, I don't know. Even a book was written, reconsidering this theory from Gunkel. But I think that some main point is still there just stand the case. Now going back here with Psalm 74, let me put up on the screen. Do you think this is a psalm harking back to creation, Dr. Töyräänvuori, or is anything else that we're missing on this psalm? Because I mean, people, you can read it. People in the audience there, and personally, as a layman, I'll go and read it line after line, and I see something like Genesis, but I'm not sure. Well, what's your take on it?
Leviathan is an interesting figure because we can find him in the Psalm and then in the book of Job, and I think in one of the prophetic books also. And Leviathan has been connected to the Ugaritic text because there we have this character or some kind of a monster that is defeated called Lotan or Litan or like however we vocalize it, that has been connected. So there's something like similar there. But as I mentioned, like in the Hebrew Bible, we can maybe make an argument for this battle having preceded creation. So it does seem like there is some connection to creation in this battle, and this like that we cannot find this in the Ugaritic text without doing like violence to the text. But in the Bible, like there's an argument to be made. But then I would be careful, like with making direct links between texts. So like, even though we can find similarities, it would like not. I'd be careful with like claiming that like there's a connection between this and Genesis necessarily, because they're like they might be from very different eras when they were written. So I really don't want to get into the question of the dating of the text of the Hebrew Bible, because that's the very
that's a quagmire. That's a quagmire. That's a quagmire. Joshua, any comments so far relating to this Psalm 74?
Yes, actually, it's one of the psalms I found more interesting because it contrasts really hard with, for example, and I remember John Day speaking about it, Psalm 104, because you find out that both mention Leviathan, but here Leviathan is a kind of cosmic threat from the creation. But in Psalm 104, you find out that it's just a pet from God. God just played with him. In that case, I don't know how related this idea goes to, for example, Babylonian background, where you find out that Marduk defeat Tiamat, as this is cosmic chaos goddess, but you find that as well Marduk have a dragon pet. So I don't know what you can tell us about that, Joanna, please. Thank you.
Well, like I'd be careful with making direct comparisons, but there is definitely like similarities, and Leviathan is a very curious character, and like I said, there are texts in the Ugaritic corpus that might be connected, so they might hint at like there having been this tradition of stories or myths on the Levantine coast where there was some kind of a monstrous creature that was defeated. And in the Ugaritic texts there are like the Lotano or Litano is not the only one, so there are like different kinds of monsters, and what's interesting is that there are two different traditions in the Ugaritic text. So in one of them, these monsters are defeated by the storm god Baal, but in another, they're defeated by the goddess Anat. So there's like two different traditions of where this combat between these like deities and the sea monsters or chaos monsters, so whatever you want to call them, happened. And I mean, even in like Ugarit, we have different traditions of this myth. It follows that like there might have been different regional variations of this myth. So there might be like a northern Levantine one and a southern Levantine one, and like even Mesopotamia, might have like different versions of this myth.
Interesting. Thank you.
Okay, and now going back here with Psalm 89. This is the passage. I'm just to get us back on track, because remember, the topic that Dr. Töyräänvuori is addressing in her book has to do like the relation between the political side of the combat myth, like bringing legitimization over the king. I'm ruling because the gods want it so who is against me, right? In this psalm, Dr. Töyräänvuori, I see like something related to that. For example, let's take I think it's the last sentence, if I'm not mistaken. Let me put it right here so I can read it for you all. I will establish his line forever, right? And then it says, oh, I can see it there. Oh, but I think it's just addressing like, because he's talking about the king in this case, so like making sure the deity, the God of Israel, is making sure that his line will be established forever on the throne. I see that connection. So if you can give us a bit of a comment on this psalm, Dr. Töyräänvuori, related to your topic, that would be much appreciated.
Yes, this definitely seems to be connected to the legitimation of like power or the kingship, and the phrase "from the river to the sea" is kind of loaded, like in current political situation. But what's like, I have to mention that in the Ugaritic texts, the sea is paralleled with the river. So this god of the sea, called Yam, is actually also called Judge River. So it has like this double name. It's like Prince Sea, Judge River. And because the storm god defeats this Prince Sea, Judge River, then I had like compared it to this text of the Hebrew Bible, where there's this parallelism between the sea and the river, because it seems like the subjugation of the sea and the river is like what God gives the king also in these texts of the Hebrew Bible. So the sea and the river are used as like delineating, I guess, the kingdom. And it seems like God gives power like this, gives dominion over this like area that is delineated between the sea and the river to the king. And it seems like this might have some like the language is very similar to what we find in these Ugaritic myths. And we should remember that the texts from Ugarit are like 1,000 years older than what we find in the Hebrew Bible. So the tradition seems to still exist, but it might have been transformed. So they're definitely not using it in the same sense as they would have in the Bronze Age. So let's just assume that the texts in the Hebrew Bible were written down in sometime in the Iron Age. So they're not using it similarly, but it seems like they're remembering something of this mythology in later times and still using it, connecting it to kingship somehow. So even though they're not remembering like how the storm god had defeated the sea and given like king the power to rule on earth through this victory, then something of this like mythology still seems to exist in the Iron Age.
Thank you, Dr. Töyräänvuori. Last comment. The first line of this chapter, it says, I will set, I think it's the deity speaking, correct me if I'm wrong, but he says, I will set his hand upon the sea. I mean, what the heck has to do the sea with the kingship anyway? That would be my layman question, Dr. Töyräänvuori. I don't know about you, Joshua, but the sea, what's going on here? But again, this is the mindset of the ancients, and that's why it's so vital, this kind of work, just like Dr. Töyräänvuori's dissertation. And then it says his right hand upon the rivers. And I think this is the connection that you are pointing out from the Ugaritic evidence. Joshua, any comments regarding this psalm?
Actually, yes. I mean, I find out something interesting related to the Psalms, specifically with the figure of David or the Davidic king. That's always related to Yahweh defeats the chaos and then appoints the king his mountain. We know this structure. My question is a little bit more to, I don't know if we're gonna get there, but it is somehow the same topic in the book of Revelation, because in the book of Revelation it's interesting how we start again with the idea to the divine warrior is the same Christ, and he have to defeat this chaos monster, the beast and stuff. It have a kind of political connection there with, for example, this psalm and other topics. Thank you.
So I'm definitely not a New Testament scholar. I have very knowledge of that.
She's honest.
I wouldn't,
She's honest. We
yeah,
love that.
I wouldn't be surprised that like similar concepts had existed. So like well, if this mythology had existed for hundreds, even thousands of years on the Levantine coast, then like using it when the New Testament was written to like discuss similar themes, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, it's, just to expand a bit, don't look, because maybe I'm throwing something quite hard there. We know the book of Revelation, it have his imagery kind of root in apocalyptic Second Temple Judaism, but it's interesting that the most important one is actually Daniel 7. And in Daniel 7, we find again this idea of 4 kingdoms described as chaos monsters coming out from the sea. So that is where my question goes on. It's like the divine word that in the New Testament is Christ. In the book of Daniel is the Son of Man. It's related to him because now it's political. These creatures are actually kingdoms. So that's my question.
So what's the question? I mean, yes.
No. My question is if the book of Daniel and later Judaism writings, including the New Testament, understood now not this monster as a monster, but actually as a kingdom representative. That's my question. Sorry.
Yeah, I can see how the thematic plays in the background this whole time, but again, like I'm not sure. Well, the chaos comes from order, so you need the dialectic of chaos and order. So you need like to have order for something to be seen as chaos, like before the order. And like even like they come from the sea. I'm not sure we can describe them as chaos monsters just because they're connected to the sea, because is the sea chaotic, like, or more chaotic than the storm? Because in Ugarit it's the storm's combat with the sea, and they both seem chaotic to me. So, and because they both have the similar desires to build a palace and create order, then like either they're both chaos or they're both order. But I can see like in the Hebrew Bible and even in the New Testament, I suppose, like I can see that there is this creation of order that follows the combat. So I think that's difference happens in this later text. That's not in the Ugaritic myths.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Okay, Joshua, let's go. Following the 4th question popping up on the screen. Please go ahead. Hit us with that question, Joshua.
Yes, please. Tell us about the sea of combat myth at Mari and Ugarit, please.
I like this one.
So I think we talked about the sea at the myth in Ugarit already, but if I like go to the Mari text. So to those who might not know, the kingdom of Mari was like in the Bronze Age a very significant kingdom along the Euphrates. Like it's about like in the middle Euphrates, and it was contemporary with the Babylon of Hammurabi, who might be like familiar to your listeners. And this kingdom of Mari was among these Amorite kingdoms. So Hammurabi was also an Amorite king. Amorites were people in the ancient Near East, and these Amorite kingdoms were loosely banded around the kingdom of Yamhad, which was governed from Aleppo, which was like the center for the worship of the storm god. And even though we found like a considerable corpus of texts from Mari, there's no myth of combat or myths of any kind really in the Mari text. So they're more like letters that were written by the king. So they're like diplomatic, political letters. And among these letters are ones where they talk about the weapons of the storm god. And these weapons of the storm god are like mentioned being objects of great importance. And in the later Ugaritic Baal cycle, I should mention that the storm god defeats the sea using weapons. So there's this smith god called Kotha Hasis who creates two weapons for Baal, and it's like using these weapons that he defeats the sea. And it seems that these weapons, like the Mari texts, are older than the Ugaritic texts. So they're like, I don't know.
Wait, what?
The Mari text, yes.
Oh, really?
So they're like, at least like 500 years older. And like I said, they're diplomatic texts, so they're not mythological texts. Well, actually, let me backtrack. We're not sure like when the Ugaritic texts were written precisely, so there is debate about that. But mostly they're like dated to late Bronze Age, whereas the Mari texts are like Middle Bronze. So the Mari texts are written around the same time as when we have these iconographic depictions of the myth from Syria. And anyway, so in this Mari text, they talk about these weapons, and they're like actual objects that had existed in the real world. They're very interesting, I think, because it seems like, well, there are these texts where there's this king called Timurlin from Mari, and his servants or his like emissaries are writing to him that these weapons have now been transported to the like temple at Derka, and they're keeping the weapons in the temple waiting for him. So it's like clear that these weapons existed, and they call them these weapons of the storm god of Aleppo. And what's interesting is that later on, like after the Mari texts were discovered, I think in the 20s, almost 100 years ago, but in the 1990s, 94, I think, there was this temple that was discovered in Aleppo in the citadel that had been a temple for the storm god. And in this temple, there are these reliefs on the temple walls where we can see like the storm god depicted there. And there's this one depiction of the storm god where he's like opposite the king, and his hands are like up, and like he's striking someone, but he's not he's not holding any weapons in his hands. So it's like striking the king with invisible weapons. And it seems like these weapons of the storm god would be like housed in the temple of Aleppo. So it makes sense that they like if the weapons were actually there, then like they didn't want to like draw them on the walls, but they used to house them in this temple in Aleppo. And it seems like, based on the Mari text, that they used to like take these weapons out from the temple and then do whatever they did with them. We're not sure, but they were somehow used. Like, and it seems because the Mari king wanted the weapons to be brought to him, that he wanted to use them for some purpose, some ritual maybe. And it seems like whoever had these weapons, whoever possessed the weapons of the storm god of Aleppo, was like the major king. Like the power of the storm god came with the weapons. So whichever king held the weapons, he was like the chosen one. He was favored by the storm god. It seems like he sort of got to sort of use the storm god's power on earth through these weapons. So he had the prestige, and like, well, here in the Ugaritic stele, you can see like he's holding two weapons. So he's holding a spear and a mace. And I have argued that people are like the weapons of the storm god were mace and a spear. So it's like a striking weapon. And
Wait, okay, that got my attention, Dr. Töyräänvuori, because I have read some other people arguing that specifically on this stele, on the I don't know, I'm not sure if it's the left or right arm, but it's actually a lightning. So am I understanding you well that you are arguing differently? No, this is not a lightning. This is a spear. Am I right?
Yes, well, definitely. It's both. So
Okay, okay.
it's a lightning tree. So the tree weapon we have in the iconography on the Syrian area, the storm god is holding usually a tree. So the tree represents the lightning because it kind of looks like the form of lightning. So one of the weapons definitely was a spear made of wood that represents like the lightning tree. So it is the lightning is the weapon of the storm god, but when it's like represented on the earthly spear, it's obviously not a lightning, but it's like an actual tree. So it's both of them.
Okay, no, thank you. Actually, you know that. Thank you for saying that, because Joshua, I don't know if you remember that episode, and also you, Dr. Töyräänvuori, about where Elijah is, contesting against the Baal's prophets and prophetess about, between who is the true God, and those priests of Baal, then they start scratching, or I don't know, uh, just making sure to rip their skin up there, and Baal seems to be off. Maybe he's taking a bath or he is taking a nap. I don't know. And then when Elijah proceeds, what happens? The story says the fire went down, from heaven. Fire came down from heaven. But some have argued. I wanna know what you think about this, Dr. Töyräänvuori. But some have argued that it was a lightning actually coming down from heaven as a response, a polemic against, who's the true storm god here is not Baal, that flunky deity, is actually Yahweh, the God of Israel. So what do you think about that, Dr. Töyräänvuori?
Yes, definitely. I think the myth is like in the background of this episode. So they're like intending to show that like the God of the Hebrew Bible is like the actual storm god, whereas Baal had a similar sphere. And I have argued that he has like these two weapons because they represent the lightning, but also the thunder. So the striking weapon is like making the sound of thunder, whereas the tree weapon represents the lightning. So he has
I didn't know that. Yeah. That's interesting. What do you think about that, Joshua?
Yes, I love this part when she's speaking about the weapons that the gods actually are being like referring to. I have a particular, maybe a little hard question, but it's related to this concept of archaism in the Bible. We know one of the ancient names of Yahweh is El Shaddai, and it's interesting how in the book of Job, Job refers to El Shaddai, and actually in the book of Ruth as well, like, oh, I have in my bag the spears of El Shaddai. So in the book of Job, make look like they are kind of seven spears, spears. I don't know, like a spear to throw away. So my question is, they are being related to some kind of ancient concept that actually El Shaddai, his weapons are spears. He has some lightning spears in the kind of the book of Ruth or in the kind of the book of Job. Thank you, Doctor.
Well, there are some of the psalms seem to have like this mentions of like the throwing of cedars or something like this. I'm not like it's been a while since I looked at the text, so I can't like give you an exact reference. But there are these like poetic texts where it seems like this like Yahweh had a weapon, and it could be this like tree weapon that we also see in the Assyrian iconography. So I think there are like some texts where they refer to these weapons also in the Hebrew Bible. Well, the name is difficult because in this article I mentioned with Dr. Müller, we talked about like the difference between like Yahweh and El, and what's like meant with these in the Hebrew text, because Psalm 29 is like definitely seems to depict a storm god, but then we're not, well, again, I'll backtrack a little. In the Greek text, there is a god called El or Ilu, who seems to be this like older god, or this inactive god somehow. Like he's called the father of God. And we're not sure. We have like two gods. So there's this storm god Baal, who's a young active god, and then this god El or Ilu, who's this older god who, you know, seems to rule over them somehow. And then this younger active god becomes the king. So I have argued that, you know, El has been like the old king who has to sort of like diminish so that this younger active god can become the king of the gods. And there's this interplay between this. And it might be that in the Bible, these two figures have sort of been smashed together so that Yahweh has aspects of both this god Ilu and then of the younger active storm god, and maybe even the solar deity. Like there's a lot of like things that went into making up the god of the Hebrew Bible. So it has a lot of influences.
Thank you.
Great,
Thank
great,
you.
great.
That's why
Thank you.
that's why you scholars, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Töyräänvuori, you call El Otios because he's inactive. All right, Joshua, let's go with the following question here. Let me know if I can put it right here, please. Let me make sure if it's here. It should be here. There you go. Okay, we already talked about this one. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. This is the fifth question.
Perfect. The fifth question is, how is the kingship of the sea portrayed in the rest of the ancient Near East literature? Go ahead.
So the conquest of the sea seems to have been important, like to the actual kings in the Near East, and it's like on account of geopolitics. Well, it seems like the conquest of the sea was important, but the degree to which it was like written down in mythology seems to have been different. So it's like it's different from place to place, and areas where they had access to the sea or where the sea was like a part of their daily lives, it was much more important in their mythologies. Whereas like people who don't live by the sea, who might have had like the central features of their geography might have been rivers or mountains or deserts, then it's not as important to them. But this myth of Enuma Elish that we mentioned earlier, the combat between Marduk and Tiamat seems to be an iteration of this myth, because the name of Tiamat also seems to mean the sea. So in Ugaritic, Yam means the sea, and then Tiamat in the Enuma Elish also seems to mean the sea. So this like conquest of the sea seems to be a feature of Enuma Elish. And also maybe in the Era epic, it also deals with like Marduk's combat. Well, it seems like in Enuma Elish, also Marduk becomes the king of the gods through like defeating the sea. And we can like find similarities between all of these myths if we start looking for them, but I wouldn't like claim a like direct connection between them necessarily. And there is like a case to be made for also the Enuma Elish to like represent the chaos kampf more than the Ugaritic myth. So like Marduk like creating order by defeating Tiamat, like creating the world out of like the corpse of the defeated enemy. Like that's why Gunkel used Enuma Elish to like create this theory of the chaos kampf. But what I find, I think, more interesting is the connection of the figure of Sargon the Akkadian, Sargon of Agade, to the conquest of the sea, because there are these like royal inscriptions where it's mentioned that Sargon had conquered the land from the upper sea to the lower sea, and this like conquest of the sea seems to be connected to the figure of Sargon the Akkadian, whether or not it had any historical basis. So whether or not like there was a king called Sargon, whether or not he actually conquered the Mediterranean Sea or like conquered the whole land from the sea to sea, it seems like they connected this conquest of the sea to the character of Sargon. And then it seemed like every king who came after him wanted to do the same thing as they think Sargon had done, just like in Charlemagne in Europe, or like Julius Caesar in Rome. Like every emperor of Rome who came after Augustus was called Caesar, because they all like wanted to exemplify this archetypal king who had done great things. And so they all had to do the same thing, because if you want to be king, you have to do what kings do, and the kings conquered the sea. So, the king had to do the same things just to be king. And I think that conquest of the sea was both ideologically, and it was actually in the real world something that was required if you wanted to be king. But like, even though I like love this long durée history to like look at these broad arcs, I don't think that everything is necessarily related, or like everything's connected. And even though there's like similar thematics, so even though these royal inscriptions do like mention the conquest of the sea, I don't think they're like necessarily always related. But definitely on the like Levantine coast, we seem to find iterations or versions of the same myth of like the storm god's conquest of the sea on behalf of the king, that seem to have persisted like a curiously long time. So even in like late antiquity, we find these stories of like Saint George defeating the dragon in the cities of like the Levantine coast, that may like contain some remembrances of the same mythology.
I muted myself. Sorry about that. No, I was saying, oops. I was saying that it's incredible, amazing how widespread this myth is. There is actually one book published by Oxford. I remember the name, perhaps you, Dr. Töyräänvuori, but it's actually, tracing the history of this myth in the European, places, a little bit of ancient Near East, because it's such a widespread. Joshua, any comments so far to this question? We lost you. I have no audio from you. Are you muted?
You hear me? You hear me
Okay, now we can hear you. You're okay.
Perfect. Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Great. Now, saying that related to this topic, I have just few questions, as small. But the first one is Dr. Joanna is familiar with Andrew Angel's work. He has gone called The Chaos and the Son of Man. Andrew Angel, as well as her, it addressed this point of the chaos monster and the Son of Man. In the case, he focuses specifically in the book of Daniel, but it's interesting how he goes from 3rd century before Christ till the second temple period. The first question is that one is she's maybe familiar with him, because they goes both together with the idea that the chaos combat myth is a political matter. It's related to intentional political kind of political agenda. Before my second question,
so unfortunately not. Like, it's my book is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year, so it's been a while since I worked on this.
Okay. Yeah, no, that Andrew Angel is a little more recently. And the second question, the quick one, is related to this idea to in the for example, well, we go to Numa Elish, is very interesting. I like Numa Elish. I have different translations here, but it's quite hard to me to find if I know in the Veil cycle is not related to the after the battle with the chaos monster is the creation. I think the Ugariti don't goes that way. But my question is, this original myth between the god or the storm god and the sea is a kind of natural archetype. Like, for example, we go to, okay, have a political application, but from the ancient times, it's just a reference to how the world was made. It's an order who is coming out from the chaos, or is an order who is against the chaos. How do you think this myth was the archetype originally?
So people have tried to find like the oldest myth, and obviously like the myths probably go back to times before writing. So when we're looking at ancient texts, we can only go so far, and probably there have been versions of like myths. I think someone like mentioned the Aztecs or something in the chat or something a while ago. So like all over the world, you have myths where deities fight, and it seems to be like something very natural. So like people have been thinking about natural phenomena, and then seen deities in these phenomena and seen them in combat somehow. So sure, like there are myths that are like go back to the dawn of time, and we cannot reach these texts. And it's like it's an interesting question, but I'm not sure we can answer it. And I again would be very careful with just drawing comparisons, because we can see similarities when we start looking for them. So when we like make something as simple as it can be, and then start looking for this like simplified version of something in different traditions, of course we can find it. But I think that in the Levantine coast, there are like features of this myth that are similar. That we can find in like many different versions on the Levantine coast that I think are not found in like other traditions of this myth. So there are myths of gods like fighting each other in Mesopotamia, in like the Hittite Empire in Egypt, but they're not necessarily iterations of this like same myth that was found on the Levantine coast, even though there are like similar features in them. So I think this was like very specifically used in these kingdoms of the Levant for like justifying the rule of king, because the storm god, they thought that he was like he was connected to Mount Saffron. So this like Levantine storm god lived on this one mountain, and I think like the kingdoms that were around this area derived their right to rule other people from this god who was living on this specific mountain in the Levant.
Thank you, Dr. Töyräänvuori. Joshua, go ahead. This is the last question, and I like this one very much.
Okay, great. It says this. Last but not least, the sea and monarchic legitimation in ancient Assyria and Babylonia, and the Northwest Semitic combat myth in Egyptian sources. Could you speak us about it, please, Dr. Joanna?
So I hope we don't end like on a flat note, but these like both were really peripheral to my thesis. So I viewed like both of these areas mostly to get a clearer understanding of what the myth was on the Levantine area, just to like see what's like what is shared by different traditions and what is unique to the Levantine myth. And I had discussed Assyria and Babylonia, mostly like how well, mostly in these areas, we find perhaps references to this myth in the character of Sargon the Akkadian. So there are these royal inscriptions, especially by the Assyrian kings, where the Assyrian kings seem to like repeat this phrase that they had like conquered the sea. And it seems like they're repeating this because Sargon had done it first. So like every king who became king needed to conquer the sea. And the Assyrian kings actually made like military excursions to the Mediterranean coast. So it seems like they had this need to conquer the land up until the Mediterranean. And then there are even these like mentions of some rituals that the kings performed on the Levantine coast. So they go to like Sidon or Byblos or these cities of the Levantine coast, and they arrange some battle scenes on the Levantine coast to represent whatever. But it seems like that combat was important, and it was important to the kings to like go to the Mediterranean Sea and show themselves as like being like really really like conqueror kings through like staging these victories on the Mediterranean coast. And I think like mostly it's not a myth, but it's like repeated in these royal inscriptions that the kings actually claim that like I did this, and it might be like that the mythology sort of like underlies this, but it's not never made explicit that they are like representing the storm god. But they have a need to repeat that they have been the conquerors of the sea. But Egypt, I think, is more relevant to the Levant in that in Egyptian texts we do find aspects of a similar mythology. And during the New Kingdom, especially following the period of the Hyksos, it seems like Levantine deities were adopted into the Egyptian pantheon, and local Egyptian gods could even be given names of Levantine deities. So, for example, they would call Baal by the name of Seth, or the other way around.
Yeah.
But they like associated Levantine deities with the Egyptian one. And Ugarit was definitely in contact with Egypt right up until the end. So like some of the final texts from Ugarit that have been discovered are like they've been in contact with Egypt, and they've asked like Egypt to provide them with a new divine statue for their temple. And I think they asked the pharaoh Meneptah for assistance, and because Egyptians were having their own problems, they weren't like they didn't help the Ugaritians, but like up until the end they were in contact with Egypt. So definitely like you would have influences in Ugarit from Egypt. And even when we look at the iconography from Ugarit, when we look at the Baal stele that you had up on the screen, you can see that the god is like wearing Egyptian clothes. It's like wearing Egyptian headgear. So like the influences of Egyptian mythology is like very clear. You can like this is like basically representing Egyptian iconography. So you can see the influences here. And they like bear Egyptian weapons. Sometimes they have like the curved sword, not in this one, but like sometimes Baal has the curved Egyptian sword. So there's no doubt that influence from Egypt came to Ugarit, but it doesn't mean like the myths necessarily were influenced by Egyptian myths, because at the same time as like the influence was coming to Ugarit, at the same time influence was coming from the Levant down to Egypt. So like a lot of Levantine concepts went into Egyptian mythology and Egyptian stories at this time. So when we look at the text from the New Kingdom time, we can actually see influences in the Egyptian text from Levantine mythologies. And it seems like the god Baal had been very important, for example, to the Ramesside pharaohs. So they I think one of Ramesses II's daughters was named Anat or something. So they like had influences from the Levantine mythology at this time. And for example, there is this myth called the Astarte papyrus that seems to contain an iteration of the same myth as we find in Ugarit. So this Astarte papyrus was found in Egypt, and it actually seems to feature like a similar myth, and they find like different versions of the same myth in different places from like later times. So there were like Roman historians who wrote down like bits and pieces of a similar myth on other cities on the Levant. But this Astarte papyrus is like another major iteration of this myth in addition to the one we found in Ugarit. And of course, like these Egyptian texts are like, many texts from Egypt, many myths seem to feature combat. So you have like gods fighting other gods in Egyptian myths. It doesn't mean like they're they're the same thing, because it seems like the sea itself wasn't as major of a feature in Egyptian mythology as it is in the Levant, because the Nile obviously was more important in Egypt than the sea. So they do like they call the Mediterranean Sea Watchador, so like it is like a scary concept, the sea, for them, but it's not like a character in mythology. But in this Astarte papyrus, you have the sea, who is an actual character, and in this papyrus, the sea like has a contest with Seth, who is Baal, and they both like want Astarte, the goddess, for themselves. And it's interesting that this feature of these two gods being in contest for the attention of this goddess is something that's missing from over it. So it seems to be a feature of this myth that had existed, that the reason they're fighting is over this woman, this goddess, and it's not found in the Ugaritic myth, which is like the most complete version of this myth that we have. And it's like interesting. So it's a similar myth that existed in Egypt, and it seems to have been influenced by Levantine mythology. And you know, there are many different myths of combat in Egypt, but it doesn't mean that you know, the influences only went outward from Egypt. The Egyptians also like adopted influences from the Levant, definitely.
Kind of makes sense to me, to be honest with you. I mean, they're part of this wider ancient context, and they're sharing a lot of cultural. And I'm pretty sure about this, Dr. Töyräänvuori. Every culture, civilization, they're adapting this myth in some ways, if you will, but they are also like adding their input, you know, like their own spin on it. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Hebrew Bible is doing just that. The authors of the Hebrew Bible are doing just that, like polemicizing, if you will. I know there are some scholars that they're not content with, they're not happy with just polemicizing. But you know, they are like, no, poking the eye of the other peoples, because this is, my God is the big one. He's the boss. No, it is yours. No, it's mine. And this is back and forth, back and forth. Joshua, any comments?
No, it's interesting how ancient is this notion of humans saying, you know, my team is the best, Ronaldo is the best, Messi is the best. I mean, we never change in this point, and always it's interesting because you see that like as yes, an archetype, as a model, is the same. I mean, they are both football players, so it's interesting how this you get to, and this is interesting thing. It realizes that how it can be a positive character for some culture, it is actually a negative character for the other. For example, you mentioned Baal. Baal for Canaanites and most of ancient Near East is a storm god, is the good guy. But for example, for the Egyptian, in some mythologies, is Set. Set is quite a bad guy in some myth. And for the Hebrew Bible, it's actually bad. Baal is against the Yahweh. So it's quite hard to me to don't realize how similar are both in that way, and that obviously creates a competition because they say, well, our storm god Yahweh is the best. No, our storm god Baal is the best. It is interesting because some topics on the Bible refers to Yahweh was named Baal in some specifically areas of
Oh, we lost you. We lost
Israel
you.
territory.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
So it was like a comment.
Yeah. And you know, you were showing that book to Dr. Töyräänvuori and myself, in which this author Daniel Sarlo, he's arguing that it's not a storm god. You know, it's the original nature of the God of Israel, Yahweh, is a solar one, which is there's another detail in the menus for the debate. Dr. Töyräänvuori, we're basically done with the questions. There is a quick question here on the comments. Let me see if I can find it for you. It says, are Baal and Ramon the same deity? I don't know who's Ramon.
Well, that's a interesting question because the name Baal just means Lord. So it's there has been discussion that like Baal has been sort of like they because the name of the deity is like too sacred to speak, that they like start using these circumlocution. So they like say he's the Lord because they don't want to say his actual name. So there are many different deities in the Levant who are called Baal. So the Baal of this place. Not the Lord of this place, is the God of this place. And it seems like the El or Ilu is similar. So El means God, and there are different L's in different texts, not just in the Hebrew Bible, but like in different texts in the Levant. There are like gods who are called the El of this place. And, it could be that they're Rimon, I think, is connected to the pomegranate, if I'm not wrong, or somehow it's connected to fertility somehow. So I'm sure there has been like a Baal of a place that's been called that, but there are like different Baals and different L's and different places which have different deities that they have called their Baal or their L.
Thank you, Dr. Töyräänvuori. Okay, we're just now we're going to land the plane here. Now, before coming to an end, Dr. Töyräänvuori, she has her own academia.edu page. You can go and find her. By the way, correct me if I'm wrong, but I saw your dissertation, not revised dissertation, you posted over there. So if people, if you can afford the book, which is a revised edition, if I'm not mistaken, you can go and for the time being, you can entertain yourself reading those. How many pages, Dr. Töyräänvuori? 400 pages?
That's over 600, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a massive one. But if you want to go, the extra mile, that's the book right up on there on your screen, It's published in the Ugarit Verlag, in Germany. And it's called Sea and the Combat Myth, Northwest Semitic Political Mythology in the Hebrew Bible by Dr. Joanna Töyräänvuori. Joshua, final comments.
Well, I have to say first that I really appreciate the time that Joanna take with us. It's so amazing how we find new scholars who are always interested in this topic, and they can go a little more far and just don't just say, well, yeah, this is on the Bible, okay, next page. No, I mean, they focus on it, they discuss on it. For sure, I would like to try to find the book and to have it, because it's worth it to have in my library here at home. I really like it. I like as well that the Dr. Joanna, she takes her time to explain a bit more open wide. For example, something I would like to know from her itself is she can give me a list of Egyptian myth related to this Canaanite background, because I never found them and I'm looking for books to read them and studying them. So I really appreciate that. And apart from it, just to say thank you. It's an amazing work that you're doing. And for sure, I would like to see in the future that maybe when my thesis is ready and I go back to some couch camp concept and discussion to speak again with her. It was just a pleasure. Thank you, Doctor.
Dr. Töyräänvuori, your final comments to round it up the whole conversation. Go ahead.
Thank you. I do have an article where I discuss the possible Egyptian influences. I think that might be on academia.edu also. So if you're looking for like texts, like Egyptian texts that might be relevant to this tradition, maybe you can look that up. And I think there's someone who is working on a similar theme, like an actual book on this. I haven't continued on this, so I'm currently studying like different things, but other people have been continuing this work. So I think it is a very fascinating topic, and I'm glad that I got to talk about it, because I worked on this a long time ago, but it was like it was a very significant part of my life back then. So yeah, it's good to reminisce.
That's good. That's good. That's there is some great sentiment attached to this work, which is it has more importance to it. Dr. Töyräänvuori, before letting you go, what's in the pipeline? What you're writing? Any new book? Any monograph? What you're up to for the audience?
So I am working on like the seal impressions from Ugarit. So, the
Okay.
most recent thing I wrote was on the Aegean influences in Ugarit, like Ugarit as part of the Aegean world. But I am like studying the stamp seals and the cylinder seals that have been found in Ugarit, and looking at like how we can maybe see how people responded to the end of the Bronze Age. There were changes in the environment and in their climate, and I'm looking at like whether we can see the iconographic motifs changing, because like people start seeing their environment differently when the Bronze Age collapse is approaching them. So I'm looking at that currently.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on that. I'm gonna be, as always, trying to just grab the links. I'm going to add it to the comments of this interview, so you can go ahead there, click on it, and we'll take you directly to Dr. Töyräänvuori's academia.edu page, so you can enjoy yourself. So don't complain about it. Don't complain about it. All right. I'm glad. I'm happy. Again, thank you, Dr. Töyräänvuori, for coming, for kindly accepting our invitation. This is the first episode of many, Lord willing. This is a dream come true, and you make it possible. You, the audience, thank you for being here, for dropping your comments. Joshua, my faithful collaborator and my partner in crime. Thank you, Joshua. I hope you're doing well there. And we're going to be watching ourselves in another episode. Also, please go ahead and just keep an eye on that. And we'll try to be more quality content and the best, trust me, the best of a scholarship as much as possible. So with Dr. Töyräänvuori, Joshua, and myself, it will be until the next time. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye.